Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of The Metagame. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, and the way that this show works is that we will be discussing a topic right here live streaming on the YouTubes between myself and the real-time chat. And we'll be doing that as soon as I get confirmation from our chat area that you guys can actually see me and hear me. So until then, I just have to speak inanely. Perfect. The audio and video checks out this time again. That's so great to hear. All right. So today's topic is about house rules. And here's the way this show works. I'm going to discuss a topic, bring it forth into the chat area realm for us to discuss. And then the people who are joining us in the YouTube chat are welcome to pitch in their own questions, comments, statements on the topic for possible inclusion in the show. I'll touch base, read their comment, and respond to it. If you have one that you'd like to have responded to, add the hashtag TMG to your comment. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my web browser's search tool to search for that hashtag in the chat window so that any chat posts that include that tag will kind of be highlighted, and those are the ones that I will be drawn to first, like a mythical board gaming moth to a flame. Though, do keep flames away from your board games. Today's episode is going to be a little bit of a neat amalgam here, because in addition to just the topics I'm going to post, I posted this question about house rules. About house rules, what they are. I'll explain what they are in just a minute in case you don't know. But I posted this in the Board Game Geek forum in the Dice Tower Guild area. And so I got a lot of responses. There were over a page or two of responses to this question of, do you use house rules? And if so, what are they? And since there was so much discussion, there's probably more feedback in the forum than I'll be able to cover right here on the show. So I thought about the best way to approach this to keep the chat involved. So here's what I think I'm going to do. We're going to go, I'm going to pick out the games that were mentioned in the Board Game Geek chat. The ones that seemed most interesting to me or had the most feedback. So I'm going to discuss that game. And while I'm discussing the house rules that came up for that particular game on the Board Game Geek forums, go ahead and post any information or house rules of your own or other comments about those games in the chat. So I'll discuss what I have to say and what the Board Game Geek Guild had to say about a specific game. And then we'll go over to the chat area to follow up about that game with anything that the chat had to say about it. And we'll kind of go from game to game, bouncing back and forth as we go through the list here. And I don't know how many games on the list we'll actually get to, but we'll see how many we can before we run out of time. Also, last week, I had a note that the audio was real low. So I'm actually going to try. Currently, my audio is set to my default settings, but I'm going to flick this little switch over here. If I can find this little switch we're so fond of. I'm actually going to adjust a little bit. The potential problem is that causes the audio to kind of get hot and peak out. So if my audio now sounds terrible or too loud or like just horrible, like I'm speaking through a drive-through speaker, let me know in the comments as well, and I'll set it back to the way it was the first time. Okay. So let me bring up my list here of these, and I got house rules all over the place. And as I jump into this, let me just explain, if you don't know, what is a house rule? Is it the rule on whose house you go and play a game at? Ooh, that would be good. But no. When we're talking about house rules here, we're talking about rules that are added to a game to change the way it plays, that makes the game different to the actual rules as they were written by the game developer. So if you're like, you know what, this game is great as written, but you know, what if we did X? And you find out that it works really well and you incorporate it into the game every time you play, then that is a house rule. And what's really interesting is, as I was going through some of the comments that have been posted so far, there have been some house rules out there that have become so popular that the game designers themselves have in subsequent future revisions and printings of the game have actually rewritten the rules to incorporate those house rules into the actual core game, which I think is just so cool because in a way it's almost like crowdsourcing to improve the game development, and that's just fascinating. All right, so let's start off with one house rule that just as an example. Then we get in here, and this is a house rule that actually I did not develop myself, but I was introduced to by a gentleman named Mur, who I played Lords of Vegas with him at Dice Tower Con earlier this summer. And here's a perfect example of a house rule where in Lords of Vegas, you can try to steal away some of your opponent's money by challenging them at one of their casinos, because that's in Lord of Vegas, you're all building up these casino empires and collecting wealth as you do so. So one of the things that you can do on your turn is to grab a pair of dice and roll them, and there's a little chart that says basically if you roll a 1, 2, 3, this happens, 4, 5, 6, this happens, so on and so forth. And based on what you roll, you obtain some of your opponent's money or something like that, which is okay. But at Dice Tower Con, what Mur said when he introduced the game to us there, he said, okay, here's the house rule we play with. We take that and we throw that out. When you go to someone's casino and challenge them, we actually grab a pair of dice and you play a quick game of craps. And it matches the theme of Lords of Vegas. It is a completely different rule set for that little challenge mode, but it fits the theme so well, I will never play that challenge mode any other way anymore. It's going to be when you go to someone's casino and you challenge them, we're going to play a quick game of craps to see what happens. And it was fantastic. It just took the game, like I said, it was thematic, and it took that to a whole nother level. And there were times that we were standing up around the table as those craps dice were thrown. So no one else on the BGG forum mentioned Lords of Vegas, but I wanted to mention that one. Also, and give a shout out to Mur because that was a fantastic house rule that completely changed that area of the game for us for the better. All right, let's see here. So I wanted to find, these aren't quite in the order I was hoping they would be in, so I'm going to have to jump around a little bit here. All right, let's start out by talking about Settlers of Catan. So if you are in the live chat watching right now and you have a house rule or something related to Settlers of Catan, now's the time to start posting the Settlers of Catan stuff, because after this, I'm going to jump over to the chat and look for any chat posts about Catan. So Settlers of Catan, there's a couple of house rules. One comes from a gentleman named Ryan in the Board Game Geek forum. And Ryan mentioned that no matter how many players they play Settlers of Catan with, they always use the 5 to 6 player rule that says that all players can build at the end of each player's turn. And when I read that, I realized I've never played Settlers of Catan with more than 4 people because I didn't even know that that was a rule. So that was pretty fascinating to hear and find out. So they play, the 5 to 6 player rules apparently allow everyone to build at the end of every player's turn. He also goes on to say that they use the 2 brick wall to increase safe hand size to 9. So as when the robber goes off, typically anyone who has more than 7 cards gets half their cards stolen by the robber. And he also removes soldier cards from the deck, which I'm not sure if that's the 5 to 6 player rule or if that's something that they just do. But that was one of the things where I was really surprised because, like I said, I realized I'd never played Catan with more than 4 people. So seeing that thing where everyone can build at the end of every player's turn, that could greatly speed up the game a little bit and also help mitigate getting stuck with those more than 7 to 9 cards in your hand and getting hit by the robber and affected by the robber as often. Because if you're building on each player's turn potentially, then you can get those cards out of your hand more quickly. So I thought that was pretty cool. A house rule, it's almost more of a variant, and I actually wanted to do a complete video on this at some point, but I just, it's on my list. But when way back in, I'd say, the early 2000s. I went and visited a friend of mine who was living out of state. So we went and visited him, and that's not the point of the story. But a friend of mine and I were playing Catan, and this was back in the, I guess, mid 2000s. Catan was still a couple of years old in the States, and there wasn't the wealth of other board games available to us. So during this long weekend that we spent at his place, we played Settlers of Catan a lot. And that was fun. But after a while, your mind starts to drift, and you start to come up with, you want to come up with other ideas. So he and I actually created this whole set of house rules for creating soldiers and well, the closest thing would be like knights. And this was before the Cities and Knights expansion existed. So we created this thing where you could train these knights and using different variations of resources and combinations of resources, purchase knights and move them around. They could rip up your opponent's roads. They could slowly destroy your opponent's cities. They could protect your own cities. So we had we turned it into almost an area control, actual offensive of game. And I still have all the rules that we wrote for this. We call it the Warlords of Catan. Of all the house rules that I've done for a game, this is probably one of my favorites because it completely changed the tone and the objectives in the game, but it still had the feel of Catan. You were still building, you're still collecting the resources, but it was like it was almost more of a variation of the game instead of just these house rules. And my friend is the only one I've ever played this variant with. And I like I say, I still have the rules. The next time I see him, I want to break it out and see if it holds up over the, it's been like at least 10 years now. I want to see if it stands the test of time, or if what we've learned about board game design and all the other games that are available, if it'll just seem like a waste to play it. But anyway, incorporating area control and aggressive attacking into Settlers of Catan, turn it into Warlords of Catan, was a house rule that we did that really turned that game on its nose. So I'm going to go over here to the chat area here and see if anyone else has done anything as crazy to Settlers of Catan by adding my little search. Spelling it right? All right. Okay, let's see how... here we go. All right, here's our Catan-specific ones for all you Catan Knights out there. Jonathan mentions that for the first 2 rounds, the robber is not in play, and we re-roll on a 7, so it starts faster. That makes sense. It keeps things kind of moving because the 7s, since no resources are generated on a 7, a roll of a 7, it does make sense that might slow down the game to start with. I noticed what Ryan mentioned, the 5 to 6 player rule that everyone can build on everyone's turn, that seemed to also be aimed towards speeding up the game a little bit. Alex mentions, my wife and I often game with a very Care Bear gaming couple who never attack one another in games. So we often have to house rule of take that mechanisms to force equal attacking among all opponents. So you actually have to, let me reread that again. We often have to house rule take that mechanisms to force equal attacking. So you actually have to say you have to spread your attacks around the table or around the different players instead of not attacking a certain person. You have to be an equal opportunity attacker. That's, I've heard that before about couples that either are not working together, but they're either afraid to attack each other or too shy to do that, or they don't want to hurt each other's feelings. I'm wondering how widespread that is, because I've heard that before. And this is the first time I've heard someone actually creating a house rule to help mitigate that problem. So I'm wondering how substantial that problem is. Okay, let's go down here a little bit. Michael mentions, returning to Catan here, Michael mentions, we once tried adding all of the expansions together and all the gems for a huge game of Ascension. That wasn't Catan, that was Ascension. So now I'm going to, instead of picturing Catan when I say this statement, picture the game Ascension. We once tried adding all of the expansions together and all of the gems for a huge game of Ascension. It was not a good idea, says Michael. You know, I don't even know how you would pull that off, because even unsleeved, the pile of it, the deck that you're pulling cards from to populate that center row, with everything in there, that deck starts to get like this tall. And if they were sleeved, it'd be like, that tall and slippery. But that's a lot of cards that you had to balance on top of each other. And I mean, forget too much going on and not being able to create the combos as easily. Just from a pure housekeeping standpoint, that pile of cards would be distractingly prone to topple, and I would just be distracted by thinking about cleaning up that pile of cards. For that reason alone, I agree that it's not something to do. Perhaps if you had some sort of container, very large, a dispenser where one card would come out at the bottom, almost like a giant cup dispenser, then yes. Then I would consider playing Ascension with all the expansions. But without that fictional card dispenser, I'm with you. No, I won't even consider it. I'm sorry, but no. All right. Now that I'm thoroughly weirded out by the way I responded to that, let's continue on with Sacha, hello, who mentions, if you build a settlement in Catan, not 2, but 3 roads away from the previous settlement, and thus mess everything up, it means that we are at war. I guess we played Catan a little bit too often. Oh, so I imagine you're talking about how you have the little, you have the little hexagons in Catan, and all settlements must be at least 1 space away, which means since a hexagon has 6 points on it, and you build your little settlements on those points, you could theoretically get 3 settlements around a hexagon if everyone shares equally. However, speaking from personal experience, some of us have realized that if you are a jerk and go on the certain areas, you can make it so that only 2 people can get their settlements built on a hex. And while some of us thoroughly enjoy doing that to our opponents, Sacha mentions that their rule was that if you did that and made it so that that hex could only have 2 people and you're not sharing it thoroughly against 3, that is a declaration of war. I like that. I would like to know what the consequences of this declaration of war were, what happened next. But just the simple fact that that's something that is bothersome enough that it's become a kind of an unwritten rule, maybe even a written rule. That's interesting to hear that other people have had that experience with it. Kabuki Kid joins us, as always. Salutations. To mention that I just thought of another house rule. In Colosseum, I think there's a rule about when you trade, but I played where trading was freeform and open to all to help speed up the game. Now, that for Colosseum, I assume could also be applied to Catan. Catan has very specific rules about when each player can trade, but we have played some games that were open market where we're just like, you know what, everyone gets 1 trade, but everyone can trade once each turn to help speed things up. So that's not unheard of, and I would certainly welcome that potential house rule into the fold. Nuno is, oh no, the comments jumped. I apologize. Here we go. Nuno mentioned that their house rule in Catan is if nobody accepts your trade offer, then you can no longer trade. That helps speed up the game. So that's like 1 shot. You strike out, you're out, next. Instead of like, I'll give you 2 wheat for sheep. No. 3 wheat? No. 2 wheat and an ore? No. 2 wheat and a brick, and so on and so forth, which really can drag out the game. So again, I guess that if you change it to just 1 try, 2 wheat, no one wants your wheat, Kevin. Just take your wheat and go to bed. We're moving on. I could totally see how that would speed up the game. We may try that next time we play Catan. Let's see here. I'm going to have to do my chat again here. I'm going to look for a couple more comments here. All right. 20-sided turtle. Hi. Mentions that we added a third dice to Catan and allowed the roller to choose two. Added a bit of strategy. Now that is interesting because that is one of the first house rules I've seen here that is not aimed towards speeding up the game of Catan and making it more efficient, but it's actually about increasing the level of strategy in it. Then that's interesting because now I don't know how far you took this, but then see, this intrigues me to the point where I want to try this because say I'm your opponent and you roll those dice and you're going to pick your two dice that benefit yourself probably, but say that there's a combination that you didn't pick that would not only help you, but would help me as well. Well, in that situation, could the opponent that's going to be benefited start to make a deal with you? Say, hey, if you take this combination that will help me as well, I'll trade you, some brick, or I will not build a road there, or something like that. You almost, with that level of strategy, you almost have invented the potential for a little more player interaction going on. Which could be horrible, could be interesting, could turn the game into something that is completely not intended to be. But, that is interesting. I'm glad the comments didn't pop away there. I'm glad I saw that one. All right. I think that's all the Catan talk for the moment. So let's move on to the next game on the list here. I'm actually going to mark Catan to remind me I've talked about it. Hooray for Catan. It's been talked about. All right. Another one here. The next one is a game that I actually have very little experience with, so I apologize. But let's talk about Formula D, because there were a lot of comments about Formula D, so I'm wondering what the old chat zone here has to say about Formula D as well. Here are some examples for you. Ryan mentioned first of all, Formula D. Formula D is a Formula car racing game where you have these formula race cars. I guess it doesn't matter what kind of cars they are. You have these cars going around a track of some sort and you're rolling dice which represent the different gears your car is in, which I think is a brilliant mechanism here. So for example, when you're in a low gear, you might roll a 4 or 6-sided dice. And as your car shifts up and you start going faster, you start rolling a larger and larger dice up to like a D20 or so, I guess, for your movement and stuff. So you're going really fast. But when you hit that turn, you better downshift down to a slower dice before you smash into something. And that's kind of one of the basic concepts of Formula D. Fantastic idea, I think. Let's see how people have changed it. Ryan mentions that in Formula D, his house rule that he uses is to use the die 20 charts with simultaneous gear selection and rolling, and use a mixture of the basic and advanced rules. So apparently Ryan's solution is to just do everything at once. Sometimes play that the cars can move through other cars, but just can't stop in the same space. So instead of this, basically Ryan turns off the collision detection in Formula D, which is written here right in front of me. I'm not 100%, and it might be my unfamiliarity. Like I said, I'm not an expert with this game. I'm not familiar with a lot of aspects of it, but where he mentions to use the die 20 charts with simultaneous gear selection and rolling, and use a mixture of the basic and advanced rules, it seems to me that that's kind of ambiguous. I mean, it almost introduces a problem I've seen with some of these house rules that we'll get to, is it almost seems like it gives the players too much freedom. So is that a problem with a house rule where it changes the game to the point where it's no longer a challenge because it waters down the gaming experience? And I'm not saying that this is what Ryan's house rule does. It's just the train of thought that it branched me off into. I would like to find out more about what Ryan is saying, like an example or something. But so maybe since that was on the Board Game Geek forum, hopefully that can be fleshed out a little bit more because it is intriguing. But then, continuing with Formula D, Ryan, a different Ryan, obviously, mentioned that, actually I think he maybe even was responding to the original Ryan's post, which isn't confusing at all. But he mentions that the die 20 charts are in the Formula D files section. So every player just needs one die 20 and a copy of that chart. So depending on what gear you're in, roll the D20 to translate to X moves. In addition to speeding up the play a ton, I like how it's very easy for players to see the range for each gear and estimate the probability of falling short or overshooting the next corner. Aha! I see. So what this Ryan is saying, and perhaps clarifying the previous Ryan or just adding to the discussion, is their house rule is they use these charts. So instead of having to grab a different dice for each gear you're in, all you need is one D20, and you just have a chart that says if you're in gear X, here's your ratio of what you're going to roll, and so on and so forth. And it just kind of breaks it down using mathematics. In that case, so that's a double-edged sword. I can see how it can speed up the game and can be neat, but with people I play with at least, the idea of rolling these different dice for each gear seems to be part of the fun. It's silly, but grabbing the different dice because you're in that gear, I don't know. I would be interested in seeing how it plays both ways. Because lots of times, if you have something that's functionality-wise makes more sense, it can override the novelty of just rolling a bunch of different dice. That novelty can wear off. But so, knowing that there are these charts available on Board Game Geek on the Formula D section in its files area, it might be a good thing to help with anyone that's wanted to streamline the play of that game for that reason. That is really cool. Finally, on Formula D here, AJ also mentioned that in Formula D, we don't allow people to take backseas or to count spaces on your turn. So they play almost the opposite of the original Ryan. They play Formula D pretty hardcore. When it's your turn, you need to promptly choose a gear, roll the dice, and move your car. Once your car has moved, that's it. It cannot go backwards, even if you make a mistake. If you want to count ahead, do it on other people's turns. And this makes the game move faster and feels more thematic because it's go, go, go. That, I think obviously could be really brutal for brand new players. But for experienced players, definitely adds a little bit of that pressure of being in this high-speed race, definitely. So that can be really, really interesting. And that, again, isn't really changing a rule or adding anything. It's just a house rule on the way you take your turns, the way you play the game. Not the game itself, but the way you play it, which I thought was interesting to see. Some of these house rules affected game rules, and some of these house rules affected the way you play a game, which I thought was very, very neat. I hadn't thought of that. I was just thinking when I came up with the topic, I was just thinking of rules for themselves. Okay, let's go back to the chat here. And the chat is super jumpy today. I apologize. And every time it jumps, I lose my little search. So again, I apologize sincerely. Okay, we're Catan. Let's see here. I'm looking now for Formula D. Wow, Arcadia Quest, cool. I apologize. All right, there's not a lot of talk. You know what, there's no talk. There's no talk at all here about Formula D. So Formula D either is not as house ruled or is not as interesting to talk about live as I had thought. So let's actually just go to what people were talking about in the chat while I was giving incredibly detailed, helpful information that was being ignored about Formula D. Juan mentions that he and his friends have made a house rule for Arcadia Quest. When we don't have time for a full campaign, we draft equipment cards of a random level. So card draft, that's one that I'm going to come back to in a little bit. But card drafting in Arcadia Quest, again, with the goal of speeding up the game when you have limited time. seeing like a recurring theme with these house rules, which is really interesting. Let's see here. Kabuki mentions, not really a house rule, but our group famously caps games at certain player counts to keep them streamlined. Quote, sorry, and I'm going to give you a faux British accent because I've never really heard you in real life, but since you have a quote here, that's the accent I'm going with. Sorry, says Kabuki Kid. This game plays to 6, but we are capping it at 4 to avoid it going too long. I also added a second 2 there for the emphasis because I thought it matched the tone. But yeah, I think everyone agrees that one was better. So even if a game plays like up to 6, you will famously cap it at a lower number. Now, is this capping done just because of time length or game complexity, or just because there's only 3 other people you actually like to play with? All answers are potentially valid, but I'm just wondering what the motivation behind that capping is, because artificial capping, that definitely is a kind of a house rule there. There's some games, I'll never play Eldritch Horror with a full complement of 6 people again. It just took way too long. It's totally feasible, viable to play it with the full complement, but conversely, Camel Up, I like playing that one. That one goes up to 8 players, and I like playing that one with 6, 7, or 8 only. Kind of a house rule not to play that with fewer, just because Camel Up is one of those games where the more the better to me, and it scales those higher numbers really well. So, very nice. Round to it. Rolls by to mention, we removed the player power cards from Dead Man's Draw, like Captain Carcass. They're not balanced well, and they make it too swingy. Without them, you're left with a simple and fun push-your-luck game. Oh, that is a good point about house rules. Yes, I've heard this mentioned often. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard anyone ever say that they prefer to play with the player power cards in Dead Man's Draw. I've played it on the app a lot. And when you go into battle, you can accumulate powers. I'm even of the mind where when I'm playing on the app by myself against the computer, and I go into a round, I won't even use the player powers for myself when I go into that. I dislike the player power so much. To me, I've gone all the way up through where I am without using a single player power, just because, I don't like them there either. They're not balanced. I don't know. But without them, Dead Man's Draw is a fantastic game, and it holds up. I agree. It holds up even better without that. So here's a house rule where you're not adding something to the game and you're not capping something to the game. You're actually removing a standard component from the game out of it to make the play experience better. And it seems to me almost universally makes the game experience better to all players. How weird is that? Boy, the only other game I can think of that kind of fits this bill for me is probably Seasons. Seasons, I'll add every single card I can get into the card pool. Every card, boom, 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 give me the cards. But the Black Moon dice and the little thing that goes in your hole that they added, where you have a little chip that goes in there, all of the things that have been introduced in the expansions that aren't just more cards, we've actually taken out. And I guess that doesn't quite fit this example because those are expansions. Whereas Dead Man's Draw, that's part of the base game. So that's not quite the same. But that's the closest thing I can think of another type of house rule, where the house rule is you're actually removing one of the options, removing some of the components, removing some of the rules when you play to make it better. So good point there, round to it. I appreciate that one because that's a good point, he said redundantly. So let's make another good point here by reading this good point by Michael Goodpoint Hastreiter, who mentions in Carcassonne, the Carcassonne rule. In Carcassonne, draw the tile you will draw at the end of your turn, so you can think about where you want to play it while the others think and take their turns. I think this speeds it up and adds table talk. Yes, this rule about drawing your tile for your next turn at the end of your turn instead of at the beginning of your next turn. This wins the award for the #1 most popular, most common house rule that I saw during this whole discussion anywhere. The forums, and I've seen it in the chat already mentioned a couple of times. So yes, this house rule of grabbing your token afterwards, I have in my notes here somewhere, and I was going to work my way to Carcassonne, trying to find it. Carcassonne. I was going to put these in alphabetical order. But then, I thought I would just free ball it, and that was not a good idea. Darn. Someone mentioned in the Board Game Geek chat, there were a couple of rules. One was the pandemic rule of playing your cards face up on the table, since it's a cooperative game, which is the second, the runner-up for the most commonly mentioned rule. But someone mentioned that rule from Pandemic and one other common house rule actually became official rules in subsequent editions of the game. So I know Pandemic mentions that now, just showing your cards. And I want to say the Carcassonne rule was actually written into some copies of the game in subsequent future editions. But I don't have the confidence to say it was that one. But even if it hasn't been written into the rules of the game, yes, the drawing the tile at the end is definitely one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, why would we play it any other way? That's so much better. It's just so obvious. Thank you, Michael, because that's one that if for some reason someone hasn't heard of that rule, it's like, bing! Oh yeah, I'm doing that from now on. Totally. So, I'm just going to draw my tile at the end of my turn, let my comments chat window jump around, and I'll have a great afternoon. Okay, let's see here. Striker mentions, Striker actually mentions, yes, look, the Carcassonne rule is so popular, other chat people are mentioning it and responding to the chat. So he says, yes, I forgot about Carcassonne. We house rule that. Oh, in addition to doing that, we house rule it by drawing 3 tiles and playing 1 like you do with Suro. It provides a bit more strategy. Makes total sense. That was usually right along with all of the other mentions of the draw the tile at the end of your turn house rule, is drawing 3 and choosing 1. So I think that's, I think with Carcassonne, it's surprising how rules like this develop, kind of with the group think of all the players, and how all the players out there, after they start to talk about it, are like, yeah, this is better. And it's just amazing when there can become a general consensus about a game that becomes so popular and so entrenched in the players' minds that it kind of becomes the de facto way to play, almost like an urban legend almost, but applied to a game. And it's just amazing to see the sociology in action in a way. Ooh. All right, let's see what else we have to say here. Let's see. Here we are. Sorry about jumping a lot today. I apologize. Juan mentions, my friends and I have made a house rule for Arcadia. Wow, it went backwards. Okay, so yes, hey, did you know that Juan still drafts the equipment for Arcadia Quest when they want a quicker game of it? He still does it, and the chat will prove it. All right, now we're back to the accent. Okay, I'm going to grab one more here, and then I'm going to go back to the non-jumping notes. Wow, I apologize. All right, John mentions, in Cosmic Encounter, when a player wins, they are no longer allowed to use that alien in future games. Oh, that one is tasty. It's almost like Cosmic Encounter Legacy in a way. That's really neat. I'm a big fan of silly little record keeping things like that in games. I love stuff like this. So now it may cause the game to be ruined if the player rules the table with it. But see, my train of thought would be, if I was to play Cosmic Encounter a lot, I would even offer the idea of twisting it a little bit. In Cosmic Encounter, when a player wins, they keep that alien race until they lose. And when they lose, it's like, well, this alien race is now been exterminated from the galaxy, and then they can no longer play with it anymore. So you kind of almost have this, this ongoing bracket of the different races. And that way, it's not just something that, okay, you won, let's move on. It's more like, well, how far can you go? And that can, that can lead to stalemate sometimes, or someone that just, wins every game and it can get boring. But it's something like that. A friend of mine and I made a house rule when we were playing Magic online a lot. We did a little mini environment where we started with just we got a couple of starters and boosters. So we created this little mini environment of it. And we made a thing where when you won games, you got to take a random card out of your opponent's collection in this little micro environment. But you could push your luck. If you won a single game, you could take a common. And then if you won like 2 games in a row, you could take an uncommon. But you could say, no, I'm not going to take anything yet. And you could push your luck to try and win a 3rd game in a row. And if you won a 3rd game in a row, you got like a rare, something like that. And that was so fun. Of course, my friend is a lot better at Magic than I am. And before long, he had mined all of the quality cards out of my deck. And I was trying to make, decks like, how can I make, 27 forests win? Because that's all I have left. So it was one of the things that became totally lopsided after a while, but getting to the point where we broke it was great. And it's just one of those things where we always think, man, we should do that again someday, but we just haven't had a chance. So those type of house rules. Here's another kind of brand of house rules. House rules, you create a mini tournament or a legacy or story going along, or continuity. That's the word I'm looking for. House rules where you create some sort of continuity that continues from one game to another. There is a way, there's a way to play house rules in a completely unique way that can really give you some interesting memories with a lot of these games. Okay. Okay, I'm going to let the comments jump down here, and let's go back. I wanted to talk about one, because there's one I actually have not tried, but I wanted to get people's feedback on. So let's talk about Xia Legends of Adrift system. I love this game. How much I love it, you'll have to watch my top 100 board games of all time series to find out exactly how it ranks. See, that's cross promotion there. I did it. I cross-promoted myself, so that's cool. Caused me to completely forget what I was talking about. Oh yeah, Xia. So Xia is a game that I love, but the one thing I don't like about it is the massive amount of downtime that can occur between your turns. And I'm talking like amount of downtime where you could go and play another game between turns. I played a 5-player game a couple times. Played 5-player games of Xia. And I had my clock, my phone, I kept it on the table with my clock up, just out of curiosity. And there were times that there were 20 to 25 minutes between my turns, easy. And I remember just kind of watching, it's like, oh, I took 3 turns this hour. That was a good hour. So it can have some downtime. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because I have an idea that I want to get the feedback or whatever on potentially. But let's talk about what Katina's house rule for Xia was. Katina says, when we play Xia Legends of Adrift system, we play with a house rule that you roll 2 dice for your engines and take the higher roll. Because as I have neglected to explain, if you don't know, Xia Legends of Adrift system is this amazing space exploration game everybody has a neato spaceship that they can outfit with different weapons and engines and cargo areas, and you can upgrade your ship as time goes by, but you're flying your little ship around the galaxy. And you actually have tiles for each section of the galaxy. And when you explore you go off the edge of one tile, you'll randomly pick a new one and add it to the galaxy, and you go explore there, continue on your way. And you can trade goods between planets, make shipping routes, and you're exploring space. It's a lot of fun. So, but one of the problems that you run into, it is actually a roll and move game. You'll have your different engines that, like Formula D, different engine sizes and stuff can give you different dice to roll. And so you can kind of get a series of low rolls, which makes your ship just putt by really slowly. So Catan mentions that their house rule is that you roll 2 dice for your engines and you take the higher roll. That helps mitigate the crappy movement rolls, which they have found to be the biggest thing that stifles your turn in the game in terms of dumb luck. And it goes on to mention that I understand the upcoming expansion has a different fix for being hosed with bad movement rolls, which is good. I had not heard of that yet. Thank you. But this is what we used, and for now, it works. So that's interesting. Again, the multiple dice, pick which one, similar to the Catan strategy. Here's what I've thought about for Xayah. Now, since you're exploring space, and lots of times different players are in completely different areas of the galaxy trying to achieve completely different things. Say you have 4 or 5 people playing this game. Now you have a current player token. Current player, here's who you are. But what I have considered it doing is adding a house rule that I've never seen done in any other games. But a house rule where you have your current player marker and they're taking their turn. However, the person across the table, so the person two turns away or so, the person on the opposite end of the table takes their turn simultaneously. You have your current marker chip, and then you have the person across the table has like a secondary player marker chip. And so those chips are moving around the table, essentially doubling this frequency in which the players get their turns. Now, of course, there is the possibility of running into conflicts, timing and stuff if the 2 players that are taking their turns are trying to do something that interacts with each other. But in that case, that's why you have a primary player and a secondary player markers, because in the case of any timing conflicts or anything like that, the primary player is the one that takes precedence, and they break all ties. They choose the timing conflicts, how they're resolved, and everything like that. And so I've wanted to see about passing 2 player tokens around the game, the table, having 2 players taking their turn simultaneously. I've never got the support from my co-players to give this a try. And unfortunately, with the amount of downtime, Xayah has been passed over for other games a couple of times now. So it's like the problem that this was potentially going to fix was enough of a problem that Xayah hasn't got to the table enough to enact this possible fix for it. So that's kind of a catch-22. But I'm wondering if anyone else out there has ever experimented with the concept of simultaneous player turns in games. It's a house rule that comes to mind to me a lot, and I desperately want to see this incorporated into games. And I'm not talking about simultaneous play where it's like, games that are supposed to be simultaneous play, where like everyone's playing a card at the same time or stuff like that. Games that aren't written as being simultaneous play, but actually incorporating that into it. Let's see here. Okay, let's go back to the chat here. And I'm sorry, it's still jumping around a lot today. I did see someone ask, okay, Xayah. Let's see where Xayah starts. Okay, I think where Xayah starts. Kabuki mentions, with Xayah, I am always invested in everyone else's turn, so I'm never bored during the other player's turn. That is true. That depends on what's happening in the game, in my experience. There are times I'm invested, but there's other times where someone might be way on the other side of the galaxy doing little cargo runs, and I'm over here trying to not get blown up by a pirate. or something like that. So the turn, you can have some disengagement. But anyway, that's a good point, though. Utah, I almost said Uth Gamer. Utah Gamer asks a good question. Okay, why not just let everyone play simultaneously in Xayah then? That's the next logical question then, isn't it? See, a game like Xayah, I think that everyone playing simultaneously would potentially cause too many timing conflicts and quite possibly ruin the game. I mean, it's a valid question. Why not just have everyone do it simultaneously then? It's certainly possible, especially if you have a priority in place of how conflicts are going to be resolved. But maybe that's one of the reasons why having just a couple players take their turn simultaneously, maybe that's why it wouldn't work. Maybe games like this, you have to either be everyone doing it together simultaneously, or you have to have it be one person at a time in order for the psychology of the game to even work. Perhaps that's the case. Unfortunately, again, I don't have enough experience with doing it that way to be able to answer that question. But it is a good question. Why not? If you're going to ruin the game a little bit, why not go and ruin it all the way? So let's see here. See, round 2 it mentions if your move doesn't directly affect the decisions of the other players, sure. Kabuki mentions, I don't think simultaneous play would work well in Xayah because too many things are dependent on turn order, I think, like, combat. And again, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for timing conflicts and stuff like that. Kind of the reverse of this is Celian mentions that it's not sure if it's actually a house rule, but they were taught the game by a friend, but they're not actually sure if it's a house rule because they were taught the game by a friend, but they do simultaneous turns in Xenoshift. So there's one. Now, Xenoshift is more of a cooperative game because everyone's going up against these alien invaders. So I could see simultaneous turns working in Xenoshift because the game was built to have that panicky, anxious feel of everyone trying to work together on a team. So Xenoshift, definitely a game where I think it could work a lot. Well, it could work a little more prone to working. Let's see. Also, a mention about Xayah. Simultaneous turns would mess up when the NPC ships do their things. That's true. There are little automated NPC ships in Xayah flying around doing this and that. And yes, it could definitely mess up that. That is true. Okay, I'm just going to continue. We're down to like our last 5 minutes, so I'm going to institute the old lightning round here. So I'm just going to continue through the comments here. Actually, these aren't, my little highlighter turned off. I'm having chat issues today. I'm sorry. The chat is just not cooperating. So let's see here. Let's go to a TMG hashtag comment that's highlighted finally that says, from Michael, who says to us, the viewers, to him, he says that I house rule werewolf to play exactly like One Night Ultimate Werewolf because I hate normal werewolf and I don't want to buy the One Night. Maybe this doesn't count as a house rule. Sure it does. I mean, you're taking one game and applying the game rules from another game to it. So you're taking one game and making a house rule. So yeah, that counts as a house rule. I've only played traditional werewolf once. I've played One Night a lot. But okay, yeah, I guess see how that could work because you're going to be still making the accusations. It pretty much kind of changes the accusation phase in a way, and I definitely could speed that up. So that is, I think, a completely valid house rule. Alex mentions, similar to your cosmic encounter thoughts, we do the same with Small World. Talking about the continuity or legacy approach to the house rules. Everyone starts subsequent games using the same race and power combo that they finished their last game with. We keep records. We've been watching you, Mr. Marler, and we noticed that you are a cave-dwelling elf. You are still a cave-dwelling elf. That Small World is definitely a game that I think that type of thing could work in, that type of continuity. So Small World and Cosmic Encounter, two excellent candidates for that. Tor Iver mentions that Legacy CE could be like if you end Legacy Cosmic Encounter could be like if you end the game with all your ships in the void, then that race is extinct and thrown in the trash. I like it. Upping the stakes a little bit for Cosmic Encounter. And the thing with Cosmic Encounter is, there's a stack of the stack of races that you have to choose from is like that tall now. There's a lot of these aliens. So even if you don't throw them in the trash, but you just kind of put them in maybe a Ziploc baggie that represents the trash, so they're available if you want them. But winnowing down the deck of available aliens like that could be a fascinating experiment to do. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, chat window, you fickle mistress. You're being so temperamental today. Letter Tycoon. Here's a game that I did not see mentioned anywhere. I played Letter Tycoon with a group that preferred everyone to have a hand of 10 cards to work with instead of the usual 7 and the common 3 on the table. So more cards segregated to each individual player. That is interesting. I'm just trying to think of any other game that I have seen the hand sizes change. No, I haven't. Okay. Chat is angry today, so we're going to let the chat sit and stew. I guess I'm going to wrap up. Wow, we didn't even scratch the surface to the fantastic house rule comments and suggestions that were posted on the Board Game Geek chat. I had 8 pages of notes for the Board Game Geek chat. So what I'm going to do is when this video is actually posted on the Dice Tower, I'm going to go into its description and I'm going to add a link to the Board Game Geek forum post to the description of this video. So anyone who wants to go see more neat house rule ideas can go to that forum post and check them out because there were some really, really good ones. Games like Zaya and Catan. Ticket to Ride was mentioned, Dungeon Roll, Blue Max, Eclipse, Lewis and Clark, Deception Murder in Hong Kong, Burger Up Myth, Pandemic, Time's Up, Machi Koro was mentioned a lot, Star Trek Panic, Jamaica, Wiz War, Shadow Throne, Robo Rally, Gauntlet of Fools, Spyfall, Escape, The Curse of the Temple, Dungeon Pets, Labyrinth, Pathfinder Adventure Card Game, Cosmic Encounter again, Smash Up, Star Realms, Eldritch Horror, and more were all covered in that Board Game Geek forum. So I highly recommend going and checking that out. To end today's show, I wanted to offer a little bit of gaming wisdom when it comes to house rules. When it comes to house rules, make sure to keep in mind that they can be very jarring. They can almost institute culture shock to other players that come in that aren't used to these house rules. So always be cognizant of the effect that house rules can have on co-players that might have their own regular way of playing the game, or may even have their own house rules that might contradict with your own. So when introducing house rules, be sure to mention that they are house rules and don't just spring them on a co-player. And I have an example for you. As any good host would, I have a story from my own personal experience. I was at one time playing Magic the Gathering with someone. And this was someone that I had never played before. We met and they were like, hey, you want to play Magic? I see you played Magic. You want to play Magic? Oh, sure. I have a regular group, but I'll next time we're in the same place at the same time, I'll have a deck with me. So we were looking forward to this game and I brought my deck. They brought their deck and we sat down to play and I drew my hand of 7 cards and he drew his hand of 7 cards and he was first. So he's like, oh, I don't have any land. And he starts flipping over the top cards of his deck. And I'm sitting there just, what in the world is going on here? Is he mulliganing? And he starts laying down some land, and he looks up and says, me and everyone I play with, we have a rule that you can just go through for your first turn and pull out as much land as you want to seed your first turn. And he starts going through and just puts down like 4 or 5 land. And my little mind said, oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to finish this game, and then I'm going to have something else I have to do that's going to prevent me from ever playing again with this person ever. And I finished up that game, and I don't even remember how after that first turn, I was unplugged and I checked out for the rest of that game. I finished it, politely excused myself, and never even bothered, because that house rule was so brokenly broken, so out there, so just really, it goes beyond anything else. And if that's the way they want to play, that's awesome. But the way that their house rule, their drastically different house rule, was introduced to a new player was done so poorly that it turned this player off to playing this or pretty much any other game with them ever again. And boo for me for letting that become a barrier to me to enjoying the hobby, but also lesson learned that if you incorporate house rules, the way you introduce them is very, very important. All right. So, so hopefully you won't encounter anything like that in the next gaming day that you're able to attend. Hopefully your gaming time will go better. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me in this little back and forth that we call the metagame. And for more board game news and reviews and commentary between now and the next time we meet, be sure to subscribe to both the Dice Tower and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channels, and check out our websites and follow us on Facebook and Twitter, but not in real life because that's stalking, but social media, please do. And until we meet again, I've been Chaz Marler, thanking you for joining me, and I'll talk to you again really soon.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.